Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 6th meeting of the Planning and Environmental Committee. Before we get started, I'd like to say the City of London is committed to making every effort in providing alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing and advisory committee meetings and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. Moving on, I am going to ask for any disclosures of pecuniary interest. I see none. Next, we're going to go to the consent items. I have had a request to pull 2.7, and I will be pulling 2.11 because there will be a presentation on 2.11 if the committee is okay with that. I have received no other requests, and therefore I would like a motion to approve the rest of the consent items. Councillor Squire, second by Deputy Mayor Helmer. And we're just going to be voting. Councillor Turner.
Sorry, Madam Chair, I was just looking to make sure that the 429 William Street was in the right order there. Is that, that's not in the consent, sorry, I was just taking one. No, okay, my apologies.
Nope, it's not in the consent. So I've got a motion, and if we can vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. So moving on to 2.7, the 2017 State of the Downtown Report. I do know there is a quick presentation. If we can have staff come forward. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. This is the 2017 State of the Downtown Report. I just have a few highlights to kind of run through. It is 2019 this year, so you'll notice that it does take a while to collect all of the data and information, and I'd like to thank all of the partners and different groups and associations that have provided input into this. It is a pretty big feat to compile it, as well as all of the staff who have had involvement in working on this as well. So the State of the Downtown Report, it's a biannual report, or kind of a report card on the downtown. It covers things like the economic progress, development activity, as well as some of the events and attraction of visitors to the downtown. So when we look at the downtown, data is collected at kind of different scales. We have 3 downtown boundaries. So the official plan, the Heritage Conservation District, and then also the Downtown Business Improvement Area boundary. So different information in the report is collected at different scales, and it's mentioned in the report where that happens. So looking at the assessment value and tax revenue for the period of 2016 and 2017, the assessment reached $1.75 billion, which is a 61% increase from 10 years ago, and it's actually more than double 20 years ago, the assessment value. Property tax revenue from downtown was over $30 million, and that's a increase per year of $8 million more since the same time 10 years ago. The downtown official plan boundary accounts for only 0.2% of the city land mass, and it produces 5.4% of the property tax. So if anyone is wondering why we should all be kind of aware and concerned with the state of the downtown, that's why, because we do have a lot of revenue generated from that. So just a quick little graph showing the assessment value as well as the taxes. You can see over the past 20 years, it has been increasing year after year. And so in terms of building permits, in 2016, there was 113 building permits issued in the downtown with a construction value of $128 million. And in 2017, there's 124 building permits with $32 million construction value. So the difference between the 2 years, two large projects, 505 Talbot, as well as the Fanshawe redevelopment downtown were both in 2016, which is why that year's a bit higher than the 2017. So overall, the 2-year period, $160 million in construction value. For development applications, through planning applications and understanding that they do take time and they cross over years many times, 2,000 or over 2,000 new residential units were considered by planning planning staff, and 1,360 residential units were approved by council through planning applications. And with those, many of them would be through bonusing as well. So a lot of additional resources are coming into the city in terms of public art funding, funding for Back to the River, and affordable housing as well. So in the past 20 years, over 2,200 residential units have been constructed in downtown. So this is just a look at the development incentive programs. This is the Rehabilitation and Redevelopment Grant Program, which is a tax increment grant. So it provides the property tax value back to developers. So we had 14 applications in each 2016 and 2017. So another incentive program that we have is the residential DC grant, or development charge grant, which grants back the development charges paid in downtown, and it's through the CIP. So we had 2 applications, one per year. So a $3 million DC grant was provided for 505 Talbot, and out of that came private investment of $60 million in the construction value, as well as $250,000 towards public art through that project. In 2017, there was a DC grant for $850,000, and that was for 356 Dundas Street, a over $9 million construction value, and it also included 50 affordable housing units. So overall, our DC grant program offers a kind of return on investment of 1 to 18 for the ratio of public to private investment. Some other incentive programs, some smaller ones, the building code and facade loans. We provided $175,000 in loans only, so repayable. And that resulted in over $600,000 private sector dollars. And in 2017, $92,000 in loans, and that was $184,000 private sector dollars. And that's about a ratio of 1 to 3 on those. So that's normally programs that are smaller existing buildings, smaller businesses use those. The Downtown London Business Association also provides grants through the Main Street the Main Street organization. They provided about 60,000 in the facade grant and in both 2016 and 2017, and the tenant improvement loan, 17,000 and 35,000. So we had 11 heritage alteration permits in 2016 and 27 in 2017. And so the downtown is a heritage conservation district, and there's also 21 individually designated properties. Some public realm improvements. So Dundas Place went through the detailed design and consultation. Back to the Rivers was also led by the London Community Foundation and transformed into the One River EA. There's an urban dog park pilot in Campbell Park. The Colburn cycle track was constructed. There was improvements to Queens Ave. And the Harrison Park Pavilion was constructed, and the Victoria Park Cenotaph also had some investment to fix that up. So there are 51,000 daytime workers. We had through the Live, Work, Learn, Play review and analysis of downtown, we were actually able to get numbers where in previous years we had guesstimated at around 35,000 daytime workers. So we were actually able to get those numbers through that study. With the opening of the new Fanshawe building, over 2,000 students and 250 staff will be in downtown, and Western per year has about 1,400 enrollment in their continuing education or continuing studies programs. So this is just the office space downtown. So the downtown has 75 or 77% of the city's office space. The vacancy rate's at about 19%. Generally, that can, over this time period, it can be kind of attributed to the movement of, social services out of, from Market Tower. We had Sifton moving to West 5. We had the Good Life building leaving as well. So it was kind of a bit of an anomaly during this period in terms of some offices leaving. But on that same note, we had a lot of a lot of businesses coming to the downtown, as well as expanding, and in particular, a lot of tech companies expanding their offices in downtown or relocating. Retail space is at a vacancy rate of 7%. That is down as well from previous years, and it's well within the very healthy vacancy rate. In downtown, we have 4,400 people, which is an increase of 75% in the past 20 years. The median age is 33 years old. Affordable housing development, I thought this would be of interest, just the affordable housing that's been added to downtown over time, noting that the project at 356 Dundas Street will add another 50 units. That's not on here because it wasn't completed at the time. This is just some large-scale development that has been happening in downtown. So we also have some under construction right now, which would have been approved during this time period. But you can see the construction value as well as the number of units. As part of the market assessment for downtown, we were also able to have some pedestrian counts done. So it's interesting to note that 45% of trips within downtown are through active transportation, so biking, walking, that sort of thing. There are 39 bus stops in downtown and 171,000 boardings in the downtown in that, that's over one of the years, just 2016. And there's 15,000 parking spaces. So I'll run through this very quickly. So Budweiser Gardens in 2016 hosted over 500,000 visitors to various events. The Grand Theatre had 92,000 visitors in the 2-year period. Museum London, 97,000 visitors in 2016. Centennial Hall, 67,000. The Convention Center hosted 274 events, 23 conventions, and the economic spin-off of that is $17.7 million impact in just 2016 alone. There were over 600,000 visitors to the Central Library and over 1.33 million visitors to the market. In 2016, 400,000 attendees at festivals and 335,000 in 2017. Overall, over 3.2 million people attended events downtown. That's kind of the accumulation of all of those various venues. And I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any more specific stuff about the content of the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. O'Hagan. I'd like to go to Councillor Squire.
Thank you very much for the report. It's really useful information going forward. I want to ask you about a couple of things, however, that I suppose concern me a little bit. And the first thing that concerns me is the vacancy rate in terms of people who are going downtown to work. And I know you've attributed a certain reason for that happening, and I don't know if that's accurate or not. But one of the things I hear about constantly is parking. Are we going to have any parking civically sponsored that's available for people going downtown? And I know that there's a report maybe coming on that matter separately, but I haven't been here for a while. So I'd like to at least get an update at this point of where we're going with that, because it's certainly something that I experience. I work downtown, and I know that when they gave me a parking spot at City Hall, I had to give up my parking spot where I work, and I can't get it back. So if I had to go out in the community right now and try to park for my work, I'd be out of luck. So I'd really like to know where we're going, if you know anything right now in general terms about the parking issue.
Through you, Madam Chair, the parking strategy was released, I think it was in 2018. If not, it was the end of 2017. It did provide a strategy as to how we deal with this issue that Councillor Squires raised. And I think that it's one that the strategy identified and would agree with, that there is an issue here, and particularly relative to convenient parking. And when you think of people walking from some of these workspaces in the evening on a winter's day, for example, the parking needs to be convenient in order for those that are using those office spaces to avail of it. The parking strategy identified key locations where a new parking garage, public parking garage, would be effective. So there's a couple of different strategies or approaches to filling that need. One is through our bonusing agreement. So recently, Mr. Tomzinska could, or Mr. Yeoman could identify the address. I can't recall, but this was York Developments on King Street across from the market, and we were able to negotiate a bonus for 41 spaces to be incorporated into that structure to a design standard that was suitable for public parking, so that it wasn't insufficient or not consistent with our standards. That's pretty significant, because when you look at the cost of one underground parking space to construct it, we're talking somewhere in the order of $50,000, $60,000, depending on a lot of different condition criteria. So that's one strategy, and we're going to, I believe that as part of that strategy, we'll be looking for other opportunities within those, I would call them center ice locations, where we're trying to get that parking availability. The second part of the strategy is for the city to look at the potential for building a facility, and that's something that is not yet fully cooked as a proposal, but certainly is in the strategy. I should look for it, and certainly it could be a point of conversation through the strategic planning exercise that you're going through now, and then the multi-year budgeting. We do have some assets in the downtown that are city-owned properties that we could potentially leverage. So at an administrative level, we've definitely been having some conversations, but timing is the key issue as to when council wants to move forward on something like that.
Thank you very much. That's helpful. I just wanted it in that way, sort of a broad strategy. I didn't expect any specific, we're going to dig a hole tomorrow sort of thing. The second thing I wanted to ask about was the affordable housing units. I don't think a day goes by where certainly I and other councillors are asked about what we're doing about affordable housing. And I was a little, I mean, to see 98 units downtown between 2006 and 2017, which is 11 years, seems like we could do better. And I know that's something you're working on, Mr. Fleming, and so maybe you can also provide me with something that I can explain to people or provide to people to say, look, we're going to do something going forward so we can do better.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would agree with Councillor that 100 units in the downtown over a 2-year period for affordable housing is not on target. I would point out that outside of the downtown boundaries, there were other projects that did develop, perhaps not during the 2016-2017 period, but over the last 5 years. That said, we are currently revving up an affordable housing development strategy, and you can look forward to that coming forward second quarter or third quarter. There's going to be the terms of reference. There's going to be a significant engagement process together with the community, and that would include affordable housing developers and providers, as well as private sector developers, and also those that are in the business of providing social services, as well as the general public. At the same time, Ms. Dadersbeer and her team are preparing an overall housing strategy, and that deals with perhaps deeper housing needs than affordable housing. Gets into things like rent geared or social housing, rent geared to income and social housing forms. So there's a significant amount of work that is going to be taking place over this upcoming year, and there's already the wheels are already in motion to make that happen, and a lot of that's because of the direction of this council asking us to move those things forward and identifying this a key strategy for this council.
To comment, I find it extremely helpful that the issues that we're identifying as a council and as a community, we're addressing them and we're moving forward on them. And it's obvious from your answers, and in both that area of parking and the area of affordable housing, we're working on those areas. And if there's been a delay, it's been part of all of us, I think, in the City of London who haven't always recognized these needs. But I'm really heartened to hear that you're moving forward, and we're not just talking about it anymore, that you're actually doing some planning. So I want to thank you for that.
Thank you for that, and I see no other questions other than Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just more comments, if I might. I think there's some really important information in this. Right at the start of the report, it talks about why do we track the impact of revitalization measures, and this is exactly why. To say, we've put in $100 million in investment into public facilities over a fair period of time. What's the impact of that, and what do we get in return? But it also highlights the fact that, as much as we're putting an investment in, so is the community. The impact of private investment, I think there was a 17-to-1 leveraging of every public dollar that went into the core in terms of development. Talking about the significant work that's been done by downtown London in helping to fan the flames of revitalization, and I think that needs to be recognized absolutely, and congratulations on that. There's been some really great news in here in terms of keeping retail vacancy rates down. In 2004, the retail vacancy rate was 18.5%, and it was riding pretty high there for a little while. To 2007, it was 12.2%. Now it's holding in a good place, as Ms. O'Hagan noted, at 7%. Really interesting on just the downtown population numbers alone, right? 75% increase in population over 20 years. Our growth as a city is about 1.2% a year. So over 20 years, you'd expect a 25% growth in population if as their city has grown overall on average. 75% is threefold what the municipal average has been within our city. So that's really showing evidence of those investments paying off. And the other interesting part, when you take a look, the relative proportion of tax contributions of assessment value in the downtown has remained relatively stable at around 5.5% or so, 5.75%, I think. If you take a look at that over time, it's stayed there, but the city has grown. So you would expect that that would be diluted a little bit more, and its relative impact on the city would decrease over time as the city grows. But it has grown with the city in a constant rate. So these are things that really need to be noticed, highlighted, brought out, and I think the report does a really good job of that. One of the notes of caution in here, I think, was also highlighted, was the impact of the movement of both Good Life and Sifton to commercial office properties out of the core. We have a core commercial office policy that limits the amount of commercial office space that can be built outside of the core. And even with relatively like small to medium-sized operations moving out of the core, the impact on vacancy is notable in the graphs just on alone, just from 2 of them. So it really shows the importance of making sure that we hold the course on those policies that limit the amount of commercial space being developed outside of the core. And it really also takes a look at the impact of those public realm Millennium Plan, and also now the projects identified in our move forward, and how important those are to maintaining the course of revitalization in our course. So thank you for that work, and this is why it's so important that we get reports like this every 2 years, so that we can take a look and say what's going right and where do we need to pay attention. And I think it's highlighted those areas quite well. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And through you, I also want to say thanks to staff for the report, and also thanks to staff for the work over the last 10 years, and especially thanks to the London Downtown Business Association, Downtown London, Main Street London, and all of the people who have stayed but true believers in our downtown, especially during the tough years, because this kind of report and these kind of results don't happen overnight. It takes a long time, and it takes patience to see the work pay off. And, you know, we always hear people say, you know, our downtown is awful and I never go downtown. Well, I say people that think downtown hasn't come so far don't know, because they don't go downtown. And, you know, anybody that was downtown this weekend saw the results of a decade or more of the really hard work that's gone into our downtown. The Dundas place was just alive and amazing. And I think all of the work has led to this kind of really national focus on London's downtown. And I think we really hit it out of the park Juno's weekend. I think all of the things that Councillor Turner pointed out are, we need to keep repeating them over and over again. And you know, what I and other councillors have always said is, what's good for downtown is good for London. So when you see that sort of imbalance in the size of the downtown versus the assessed value and the property taxes that are collected, it has such benefit to everybody living in London. And I'm really happy to see, you know, sure, we lost some players downtown, Sifton and Good Life, but to see the tech industry trying to fill in those gaps, and I know our tech industry continues to grow, and the workers that work in the tech industry tend to want to be downtown. And so this is great. All of these things go hand in hand, and I suspect as well, you know, you see the phenomenal numbers in the increase in people living downtown. If you build it, they will come. You know, it's if people live there, then we will see better things even still happening as far as retail downtown, and also office space and all of those things, because they go hand in hand. And I just think everybody involved has done a really good job. It didn't happen overnight. It's been years of hard work, and I really appreciate the work that's gone in. So thanks.
Thank you, and I see no other comments. I'd just like to, other than Deputy Mayor Helmer.
I'm going to be very brief because my colleagues have covered a lot of ground, but the slightly different organization of the report compared to previous years. And I want to say, I think that that's an improvement in terms of organizing it the way that it has been organized. Trying to, I think if we can standardize on this kind of format, I think it'll make it easier if you're looking at, you know, the one from 2 years ago and this year, you know, what's sort of changed. It's really pulling out what's highlighted. I think the overall messaging has been covered by my colleagues in terms of all the positive stuff that's happening downtown. And I think that's really important. I'm glad that the downtown parking strategy came up, because I think one of the things we see too is that what has happened in the recent past is not what's going to happen in the near future. You know, like there's this transition happening as you start building in on the empty lots. The same kind of things that supported growth downtown aren't there to support it anymore. So when you have lots of service parking lots, you can have a lot of people driving downtown. Once you start losing the service parking lots as people build on them, you don't have so much surface parking supply, right? So you have to switch to other kinds of parking. You have to get people there in ways that are not coming down in their own car. And so, you know, the future growth of the downtown is going to be different than, you know, the last 20 years we're downtown. And you know, you can't have, we're not going to have 19% of the land area as surface parking lots 15 years from now. You know, some of those are going to get filled in. And as we keep going, there's going to be less and less available for surface parking. So I think, you know, this is the area where there's so much high demand. This is where everyone is going to try and go as high as possible, and making sure that that's done in a good way, in a way that works together is really important. So the retrospective piece is really helpful, but I think it's also good that we're tying in all the different parts of the strategy into this. So I think that's why I say the key metrics in the organization, that's really helpful. How do people move around downtown? What's going on with the office space? And I just wanted to pass that on.
Thank you for those comments, and if I may, I really appreciate the comments from the committee, and reading the report, I found how important it is to all of London, the downtown area. The 2% of the London's land area is downtown, but brings in 5.42% to the tax levy, representing a ward in suburbia. That really is something that reminds me of how important developing downtown is. So I want to thank staff for this report. Look forward to the next update as well. So with that, I'd like a motion to receive. Councillor Cassidy, second by Councillor Turner.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. And just before we move on to 2.11, which was also pulled, I do want to recognize Mr. Billings and the Fanshawe students from Urban Design Fanshawe course. Pardon? GIS and Urban Planning. Yes, thank you. Thank you for having us. Thank you for being here. I hope you enjoy the meeting. And with that, I'd like to move on to 2.11, which is the Dingman Creek Subwatershed Screening Area Mapping Update. There is a very small presentation from Upper Thames. I know one of the consent items we've already approved regarding the Dingman, I'm just trying to find it here on the list. We've already referred that back, but I think staff from Upper Thames will give a quick presentation on the screening mapping and how it's how it's going to unfold. Ms. Arnett, and before I go to Ms. Arnett, I would like to go to Mr. Yeoman.
Through the chair, so very quickly, I just wanted to introduce Tracy Annett for the benefit of the committee. We had a report that went forward back in November on this matter. I've had a new committee since then, so you may not be familiar with Tracy Annett. She's the manager of environmental planning at the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority, and we greatly appreciate her being here tonight.
Thank you so much. And I also just wanted to give this opportunity to thank staff, because the city staff have been very involved throughout this process. It has been a combination of an EEA, it's been planning and development services, it's been involved with stormwater management services. So a great number of staff have gone into all the different meetings that we've had on this subject matter. So I appreciate their help very much. So with that, this is more of a Conservation Authority's background on our involvement with the Dingman EA and specifically the updates to the floodplain modeling and mapping, which ultimately resulted in the screening area approach. As you can see from the outline, we'll first be talking about the Conservation Authority's regulations so that the committee has a better understanding of our role and responsibilities in development applications and our regulatory authority as well. Our involvement in Dingman, a little bit about the floodplain update and modeling. We're also doing other hazard land updates as well, include erosion hazards, but specifically we'll be talking about the floodplain, and then how we arrived at our screening area approach and the next steps that we'll be undertaking. So with the regulation limits, under the Conservation Authorities Act, each conservation authority has an implementation regulation. The Upper Thames River Conservation Authority is Regulation 15706. It has a long title, Development Interference with Wetlands and Alterations to Shorelines and Watercourses. Luckily, in the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority, we don't have any shorelines to worry about, but in the City of London, you also have the Kettle Creek Conservation Authority and the Lower Thames Valley Conservation Authority that have their own specific regulations that deal with their shorelines, as well as the others that are mentioned there. With the Conservation Authorities Act, it's also important to remember that it is considered other applicable law under the building code. So before any building permit can be issued, the building inspector has to ensure that all other applicable law is considered, and the Conservation Authorities Act is listed amongst those. With the Act and regulation, they provide the direction to all conservation authorities to identify hazard areas. The areas where the regulation applies are outlined in the list here, from watercourses, valleys and steep slopes, and areas subject to erosion. So those can be areas not within an apparent valley, but have an erosive process because the watercourse meanders through those low valley systems. The floodplains themselves, wetlands, because those are the areas that act like a sponge and hold floodwaters and retain those waters and release them slowly. So they have a huge impact on mitigating flood damages as well. And so we're also looking at those surrounding areas around wetlands for their impacts of their hydraulic function, we call it. Wanted to point out here that one of the most important things is that with the regulation describes these areas all in the text. So they don't necessarily need to be mapped because ultimately the default, if there's a conflict between a text description and the areas that have been mapped previously, is the text of the regulation that prevails. And also noting that this regulation has not changed at all. It's still the same, but we're undergoing updating to better reflect those areas that should be mapped. So a little bit of a graphic to kind of describe that slide previously. We use mapping processes that have been guided by Conservation Ontario, which is the umbrella organization for conservation authorities throughout the province of Ontario, and also the Ministry of Natural Resources. It shows how each of those layers combined create that outer extent of the regulation limit. And it's not just the features themselves, there's also 15-meter allowances around those features, almost as a buffer area, if you could, to ensure that those features, if they're present on the landscape, that's a trigger for the Conservation Authority to become involved. It's not necessarily a no-go zone, or it's an opportunity for the Conservation Authority to review, gather more information, and then make a determination if it's something that can be permitted through our permit process or something that may be not appropriate in those areas. So under development review, conservation authorities are unique in that we have a delegated responsibility to review municipal policy documents and applications under the Planning Act to ensure that they're consistent with the natural hazard policies contained in Section 3.1 of the Provincial Policy Statement. So, like I said, that's quite unique that the conservation authorities have that role, but it also it reflects that our regulatory role is very closely aligned to those Section 3.1 policies. Also, we are public commenting bodies pursuant to Section 1 of the Planning Act and any of those regulations made under the Planning Act. So as such, we're notified of any of those planning documents. And then to streamline those processes, we can have pre-screening protocols with our municipalities. So that direction's provided in a document that Ministry of Natural Resources produces. It's their policies and procedures manuals for conservation authorities. And it outlines kind of the general processes for how conservation authorities should be circulated in these applications because of our various roles in development review. So a little bit about Dingman EA and the background to it and how the Conservation Authority has been involved. But initially, the Stormwater Servicing Municipal Class Environmental Assessment back in October 2015. The Copper Temps was appointed to carry out the modeling for the floodplain update. It's very important to understand the modeling, where the floodplains are, to better understand where stormwater servicing and facilities should be located. So the EA initiatives were intended to inform the review of future development applications within the subwatershed as well. And going along with that, it's very important to understand, to be informed about where those hazard lands are and those floodplains are to ensure that development is situated appropriately. With floodplain modeling and mapping, there are a technical guide is shown here. How hazards are to be identified. I've only shown the one document here for river and stream systems for flooding hazards. There are other technical guidance documents produced by the province to reflect riverine erosion hazards and those shoreline hazards as well. So this is the guidance material that is used for implementing Section 3.1 of the PPS. With the floodplain modeling, a few photos here showing what that involves, going out with GPS units, looking at bridges and any barriers and cross sections in the river itself to understand where the conveyance of the flow during flood events would happen, and all that information is used. But we also have new technical information to more accurately identify floodplain areas. There's a much better digital elevation modeling available, so that has been used. So very early on, as this modeling information was collected, the field data was collected, inputted into the model, it became apparent that the previous floodplain mapping was no longer accurate. When you look at the Dingman Creek subwatershed, it's a huge subwatershed. Only a small portion of it is within the City of London. It extends out beyond into Thames Centre, into the west, and to the east down to Middlesex Centre and Delaware area. So when we're looking at that size of a watershed, our previous modeling and mapping, much of it was just estimated. There wasn't the same digital elevation information at the time, the same contour information, and quite honestly, they're not the same development pressure. So this is a comprehensive review of the entire subwatershed to have better and more accurate modeling and mapping. So while we're at the beginning of the public engagement process, we wanted to make sure that because there were these changes, that we wanted to ensure that that was flagged early on in the process to make sure all applications were aware that this process is ongoing, this information is changing. So we want to make sure that those applications are being flagged and they're being directed to our office. As Paul Yeoman coined the term, the conversation limit, an area where we need to be having these conversations about potential development up front. And again, as noted in the report, the modeling and mapping update will also be peer reviewed through advisory services agreement. So with the screening area map, the intent was really to be an interim tool to aid both the city staff and ourselves to ensure that we're appropriately engaged early in the process. We want to ensure that we're capturing all natural hazard lands as identified in Section 3.1, and also including impacts of climate change. Specific to that, all planning authorities under Section 3.1.3 of the PPS should consider the impacts of climate change. There isn't a lot of guidance on that at the moment from the province, but we've taken an approach, and that is also being peer reviewed, the approach that's been taken. So there's been a number of information reports previously, as mentioned, at PAC here back in November, and today. It's also been to our board of directors back in November after the initial PAC meeting, and in February as an update. So the kind of the summary of next steps, as we're moving through this process, there's going to be further review and refinement of the hazard areas. That will continue. We have a webpage dedicated to flood and erosion hazard mapping updates and include kind of answers to frequently asked questions. So that can help landowners and developers that may have more questions about this approach. The peer review or advisory services of the modeling has been initiated and is intended to be completed end of June, summer 2019, I believe the report says. And the Upper Thames and the city have initiated an implementation team. We meet regularly to discuss ongoing applications and where we're at in the process to ensure that there is that continued dialogue between the agencies so that we're on the same page and are aware of potential applications moving forward as well. Public consultation and engagement will continue through the EA process. And ultimately with the EA through phase 2 is the consideration of other options for flood mitigation and or policy approaches. So flood mitigation could include anything from rechannelization to allow for more conveyance through certain corridors. The conveyance could be naturalized as well and provide an environmental benefit, to things that could be upgrades to culvert size. Perhaps it's a conveyance issue where backwaters are with culverts being undersized from previous works done years and years ago. Other things that could be considered as policy approaches on impacted lands. Is there an opportunity to look at the depth and velocity of flooding to identify where flood fringe may be appropriate in certain cases and for certain uses? So those are the types of things that we're going to be continuing to work on. And so with that, I'll ask if there's any further questions. But again, it's not just myself. There's a number of city staff people in the room that could help as well answer those questions.
Thank you very much for the presentation. And I'd like to go to Councillor Squire.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I think when we hear from people who own property and are developing property, that they don't like uncertainty and they don't necessarily like what they bought changing. I mean, it's pretty obvious from the people who contacted me, those are concerns. They may have bought a piece of property and find out it's different now than what they thought. So I'm just wondering how those people who are sort of anxious about any changes, how are you engaging them? You've talked about public engagement, public process. Are you letting them know, well, we're potentially looking at your land, and we haven't made any decisions yet, but you know, we're moving ahead with a process? Because obviously at the end of the day, I certainly don't want to be hearing from people after a decision's been made. They're saying a decision's been made, we didn't know about it, and now we're really unhappy. I just want to make sure that there's a process involved that gives people a real opportunity to know what's happening and why it's happening.
Mr. Yeoman?
Through the chair, I can start with that. Ms. Chambers might be able to augment a little bit as well. It's a very good comment that you raised, of course, Councillor. We did have a stakeholder meeting back in December that was very well attended. I think we had about 50 landowners that were there in participation and to find out what the next steps were. We don't have the resources to notify all property owners within the area, of course. We're going to be monitoring this as well. There may be an opportunity to do some enhanced notifications through the EA process as well. But as applications do come in, it's one of the first conversations that's in the screening area that we're having a talk about is about these matters. We've also proactively reached out to the landowners that are impacted by the screening area, and of course, life's better with a map. So we've got good maps for you in the report, and this color version here does provide a bit more illustration in terms of the screening area and the impacts. When this was first brought forward, there's some concerns that were raised about how the screening area basically washed out the entire southwest area of the city. What this is doing is refining actually the screening area in relation to the timing of infrastructure that's going to be put in, so when the lands will actually be coming on for development. And what we're finding is that generally when it's closer to Dingman, the issues are obviously a lot more significant, but there is a lot of development that's well underway that's already been reviewed through the process, and we're continuing those conversations.
Councillor Squire.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, just to follow up then, we know there's two groups, the London Development Institute and the London Home Builders Association, that expressed a huge interest in this process. Is it safe to assume you're in contact with them, or they're aware of what's going on?
Through the chair, very much so. They were participating in that development stakeholder meeting I mentioned. We also had an update on this matter at our Building and Development Liaison Forum meeting a couple weeks ago, and LHB is a member there as well.
Thank you. Councillor Turner?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the presentation. This is helpful, and I think I echo Councillor Squire's concerns. I think they're going to be ongoing. One of the often when we take a look at parcels for development or consideration, we're delineating something that's either static or shrinking in terms of its natural feature. In terms of floodplains, we're starting to look at features that are expanding. And that creates a lot of uncertainty, especially where properties may have been bought for speculative purposes and future development. And if they become sterilized from development in the future on an investment that someone made now, then there becomes some uncertainty in that. So I can appreciate the apprehension they might have going through that. So I guess the question is, I mean, we're looking at Dingman right now, and that area, taking a look at evaluating some unevaluated features and also putting new evaluations on previously existing features too. I'd imagine this process, as you said, Ms. Annett, that this requires some revisiting every once in a while. What's in the store for the future of other floodplains that might be in terms of more central and already constantly evaluated or considered to be somewhat identified in terms of floodplain, flood fringe, 250 limits and all of that?
Ms. Annett?
Yes, thank you. Through you, Ms. Chair. Yes, I would be remiss in saying that updating our floodplains throughout our entire watershed is one of our strategic targets through our strategic plan. We are working throughout the watershed to undertake this modeling and mapping review. It became evident very early on with the EA process that Dingman was a priority area. But like I said, that's not to say that the same type of mapping and work isn't being done elsewhere throughout our entire watershed. The goal is to complete that by 2020. We've been very fortunate in receiving national disaster mitigation funding, whereas historically there really hadn't been a lot of provincial funding for updates to floodplain mapping. So it's been quite some time for some of our subwatersheds to be thoroughly examined in the same way. And as I'd mentioned earlier, with technology advancements, I should say, and the ability of having such detailed elevation information available, DEM is one, LIDAR is the other, even some of that modeling will take us away from having to do as much intensive field work and being able to have those resources to be entered directly into the model too, with just some corrections and clarifications. So like I said, that's certainly ongoing.
Thank you very much. And through you, Madam Chair, I'd imagine that you talked about some technological upgrades and taking a look at topography and fluvial dynamic and all that fun stuff. Also, I'd imagine that some of the assumptions in terms of the modeling have to change in terms of what overall inputs might be into a system. And so that's going to change significantly. Well, I guess maybe that's the question. Do you contemplate that these might have significant impacts in either the expansion of current floodplains or fairly moderate to minor as they go?
Through you, Madam Chair. That's an excellent question. I have to say I'm a planner, not an engineer. But our engineers have said, yeah, that is one of the challenges, is the assumptions that are placed into the model about runoff coefficients, changes in how water runs off the land. You know, clearly when you have a paved surface, that's reacting very differently than an agricultural field. But at the same time, I think even agricultural fields with their tillage now and with their placement of tiling, much more intensive than it was, you know, even 20 years ago. Farm prices have gone up. I would think that could be an impact as well. I don't know if we've really necessarily examined how that impact will occur, but certainly all of these factors play into those changes in what we're seeing in the modeling and mapping moving forward. So that's why it is so important to have regular updates to this information, especially in areas that are urbanizing and are changing drastically.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, one more perhaps for Mr. Yeoman. With respect to the process for applicants, in the report it mentions that applicants are advised to consult with the Upper Thames in advance of making an application to the city. a lot of our planning documents are fairly established, and then consultants can take a look at those and have a sense of whether there's kind of a go, no-go in terms of bringing something forward. This seems a little more nebulous for an applicant. Is there, I'd imagine still the authorities, as it sounds, exist pretty clearly with the city and the Conservation Authority in order to permit or not permit, and even if there's nothing, I think Anna had stated that the authority rests in the text, not in the map, which is a really interesting point, because that's where you go back to, and that's so. Very roundabout way of asking, does this make us assailable in any way as applicants are trying to bring things forward? Is there a way that we can help them navigate that process and that uncertainty?
Mr. Feldberg?
Through you, Madam Chair. So about a year and a half ago, we went through a significant subdivision approval process enhancement where we moved a lot of the environmental, a lot of the hydrogeological components up to the front end prior to draft approval. So some of that consultation that an applicant would be expected to do with the Upper Thames is prior to us actually bringing a report forward for draft approval. And that kind of deals with some of those issues. The screening area has been made public through this report and the previous one in November as well. Our site plan staff also have a layer on CityMap, which allows them to take a look and see if a particular application is in the screening area, at which point they would then communicate that to the applicant and ask them to consult with the Upper Thames.
Thank you, and thank you, Ms. Annette, as well. So with that, I am looking for a motion to receive this update from UTRCA Dingman Creek subwater shed screening area mapping. Motion made by Councillor Turner, seconded by Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. And with that ends the consent items. I am going to ask the committee to ask the committee to move up the latch report that we will be receiving at the end of this meeting. We do have a delegation request as well. So I am looking at moving up the latch report for now. There will be a presentation as well from Latch. So Councillor Turner is making that motion. I am going to ask the committee as well to receive the delegation request too at the same time. So I am looking for a seconder, Councillor Cassidy. And with that, we can
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
thank you for the committee for allowing the Latch report to be moved up. In the Latch report, if you look at 2.2, there is a heritage alteration permit application for 195 Dundas Street. We have not received the application on 195 Dundas Street, but there is a delegation request here as well as a presentation from Latch. So if I could ask Latch to present the report and welcome Ms. Wally. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Maggie Morley and I'm Vice Chair of Latch. Wanted to come and give you the Latch report tonight, but I have to tell you right from the beginning that I was not present at this Latch meeting. But anyway, I've been filled in extensively by my colleagues on the on the board, so I could certainly pick up some items that came up. I think that we talked about 195 Dundas Street. That was an application for building a tower between King Street and Dundas Street. The Latch felt that there was no heritage impact statement included in this proposal, and they felt that that was necessary before the Latch could respond to that, because that would be the item that Latch would be most concerned with. There was also some slight feelings that some of the elevations and drawings were not quite clear because they did not include a proper vision of how this would fit within the existing streetscape. I think that you might find that what you see is that some of the buildings have sort of been removed or ghosted, as it were, so you don't get a proper appreciation of how this would look. This is a heritage conservation district issue, and that would have been more definitely been important to be included in that. The other item I want to speak to, I think you'll be discussing shortly. Excuse me a minute. Is the demolition request for 1588 Clark Road. And since this came up and came onto the Latch agenda, there has been quite a lot of new information coming out from people, my colleagues in the ACO and so on, that this family, this is the Tackerberry family, who were a very important pioneer family. They came to London in 1839. So that's very early, and established a farm out there on Clarkside Road and, Clark Road as it is now. And Huron Street, this area was called the Grove, and they had considerable influence in establishing a church there. They were Irish pioneers, but they actually were Protestant Methodist. And they first of all went to the United States, Madison County, and then quite quickly came up here. And so that's a significant sort of little group of people that were out there doing important things. Quite a few families had a lot of influence on London subsequently. And one of my colleagues has also mentioned something to do with the Underground Railroad. So I think that Latch feels that it would be really important for us to have a little more time to do a little more research on this particular property. It certainly seems that the property itself has more historical significance than architectural at this point because it's been considerably altered. However, it does have a connection with 1424 Clark Road, which is actually in the Upper Thames, actually in Fanshawe Park, still in situ of its original place. It's not in the Pioneer Village, but it is a property we looked into a couple of years ago because it's such a very special property, and it has been not altered at all. So there is a connection here. We feel there's a little group of people and a little group of buildings that require a bit more research. We think that the research already done by Laura Dent has been exemplary and very thorough, but there are just these few things that have come up at the last moment. So those are my main points from the Latch report. And if anybody has any questions.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? I see none at this time. Thank you. Not right now. We're just receiving the Latch report at the moment. It's just being presented to us. Councillor Turner.
Sorry, if I might, for their clarification, I believe they're probably here with respect to 1588 Clark. Is that correct? There is a public participation meeting specifically for that, and at that time, we'll be moving into that section. So this is a report from an advisory committee to us. We're just hearing their input right now, and then we'll open that public participation meeting at a separate time, but certainly just a little bit later in this meeting.
Thank you. It's later on in the agenda. And I'd like to, we've accepted a delegation request here on 195 Dundas Street as well. So I would like to ask the delegation to come forward. And you do have 5 minutes. Not sure where the delegation is. Oh, sorry, yes.
I'm just looking over to staff. I didn't know if staff was going to make a presentation first or whether I was
Mr. Yeoman?
Through the chair, we do have a presentation that we could make. It would be following the delegation, should committee wish to have more information.
Okay. Thank you. So please come forward, and if you can give your name and at.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And just to remind you, you do have 5 minutes.
That's fine. My name is Greg Priamo. I'm a land use planning consultant with Zelinka Priamo Limited. We're acting for Ayerswood Developments Limited. We have an application that was filed back in May of 2018 for site plan approval for a 25-story, 140-unit apartment building, which constitutes phase 1 of a 3-tower project on this property. It's roughly about 2 hectares, bounded by Clarence King and Dundas, the former Smuggler's Alley property. As part of that process, we need to secure a heritage alteration permit. And we had the occasion to be at Latch at their last meeting to seek that approval. We had a staff report recommending approval of it. And there were some concerns expressed by Latch regarding some of the information. There was a fairly lengthy and, in our view, comprehensive report from staff along with their recommendation. We did provide, as part of our site plan application, a heritage impact statement. I'm not exactly sure procedurally why it was or wasn't added to Latch's agenda, but it's been present since May of last year. And essentially what it comes down to is we have a property that has a very peculiar shape. I was sort of counting on using this staff's report that they were going to put up for their presentation to show you some of the drawings, but nonetheless, the phase 1 is about 30 meters south of the Dundas Street frontage. And it's a narrow opening between existing buildings, and while we explored the possibility of built form, because of its configuration and the nature of our land use, it wasn't suitable for the part of this project. And so we sat down with staff, urban design, planning, and heritage staff to talk about what we could do with this space. Currently, it's a parking lot, and it just has a sort of a rundown wrought iron fence along the Dundas Street frontage. And what we envisioned was a forecourt that would represent the principal entry from this apartment building to Dundas Street. And as the dialogue went along, and as the projects such as Dundas Place evolved, we thought what might be an effective approach was to extend the sort of design theme of Dundas Place into this forecourt and create what we would often call a publicly accessible private space. And so we worked with staff to come up with landscaping, hard surface treatments, lighting, and that type of thing, so that there was a seamless extension of what's happening on Dundas Place. And as it turns out, it was very timely because we would be under construction while this phase of Dundas Place was under construction, and we could affect all of our underground service connections that are through this space and deliver that space around the same time that that Dundas Place was finishing up. Perhaps not entirely because we have a 25-story apartment building to construct, but ultimately it would be an interesting addition to the Dundas streetscape. We also included, as the dialogue went on, a series of features along the Dundas Street frontage, essentially for sentinels, we were calling them, that were basically a combination of things. One, a base that was designed to reflect the masonry treatment of the building that was formerly on this site, and a top portion that was going to be engaged by some of the building material that we're using in our apartment buildings to bring the modern piece into the heritage compatible piece to sort of connect the circle. And thirdly, we've lit those features with lighting, which is the same lighting specified for Dundas Place. So we added that extra layer where we were giving credence to the Dundas Place initiative as well. When we were at Latch, and I will tell the committee right now, I presented an image that I received at the last minute from our architects, which was not accurate. And I don't have it here tonight, it's in the shredder. It was not useful, it probably didn't help the discussion, but nonetheless, the drawings that are in the staff report are accurate. And they do carefully illustrate what's being proposed. Our problem is timing. We've been at this project we started in 2012. We ran into some issues with the BRT program that delayed the project for some time. We proceeded with this. We've been going through the process now since May.
Sorry to interrupt, but I just want to let you know you've got about 30 seconds.
Thank you. So essentially what we're here today is to ask the committee to consider the proposition that we put forward and whether or not in their consideration a heritage alteration permit is advisable. We would certainly like that. There's been a request from Latch for us to go to the next meeting. I got nothing else to give Latch, so it's just another 30 days that the project gets delayed. We're at a point now where we think we put all we can on the table. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll answer any questions that the committee may have.
I think Councillor Turner.
Oh, sorry.
Through you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Priamo. So we have the staff presentation that was presented to Latch and appended to their report there. I can see some of the questions because there really isn't a street to scale elevation for looking south onto Dundas Street to have a sense of what the context is from building to building to gap to building. You talked about using a publicly accessible private amenity space in advance of that and having perhaps the building set back a little bit. But from the scale of these drawings, it's fairly distant, so you can't see what the 4 floors of Dundas would look like facing that street. So I can see where potentially Latch's concern is in terms of doing a heritage impact assessment and how that fits in. You said that one had been provided already, but that hadn't reached Latch, is that correct?
One was filed with the site plan application as is required. Just for clarity purposes, we are not proposing a building on Dundas Street. In fact, the building we're proposing is 30 feet or 100 feet south of Dundas Street. The space in question is currently vacant. Our proposal essentially is to leave it that way, except greatly improve its condition and give it a functional use in the interim. If there is a condition in the future where a building could be justified there, nothing we're doing now materially prevents that from happening. It's just not part of our development proposal at this point.
Mr. Yeoman.
Through the chair, if I could just provide a matter of clarification. So heritage alteration permits don't normally append the heritage impact statement associated with them. We take forward, based on the delegation bylaw, when it matters, go to Latch. We take forward a staff report that articulates the staff position, the analysis on the project, and other factors that inform the recommendation that came before the committee.
And are there any other questions? I see none. I would, if the committee will allow me, to go to staff and just ask staff, do you have any concerns, or could you just clarify, please?
Yeah, through the chair, so this is a bit of a unique situation here. This matter hasn't been before committee to date. Normally we've got certain triggering actions that come before you. So for example, there's a demolition permit request that would prompt the heritage review. There'd be a rezoning that'd be before you as well. a lot of heritage alteration permits are addressed to the delegation bylaw that you have, that you've approved as well. So it is a bit of a unique circumstance. The recommendation we did take forward is supportive of the heritage alteration permit. We do believe that it fulfills the intent of the Heritage Conservation District. It's providing the potential for future infill, a gateway feature for improving street edge and enclosure. There's heritage design in the masonry for the pillars that are going to be provided with the entrance feature. It's adding to the vibrancy of the downtown, which is part of the Heritage Conservation District, and it doesn't detract from the neighboring buildings or the streetscape as well. So that's why the recommendation was before Latch for approval.
So I guess we have decision here to make. We could request it to go back to Latch, or we could support it not going back. The next planning meeting, I understand, is April the 15th, if I've got that correct. So it is a while. There is an opportunity maybe to hold a special planning meeting, but I'm in the hands of the committee here. Councillor Cassidy.
So again, through you, Madam Chair, going to just ask Mr. Yeoman for clarity that the staff recommendation is to move forward.
Through the chair, the staff recommendation to Latch was the approval of the heritage alteration permit. Latch has the ability to make any recommendation to committee on the heritage alteration permit for the approval that you have for the permit itself. That recommendation has come forward to defer it, and it's up to council to determine whether or not they would like to proceed on that.
So we have a deferral and a approval, I guess, are the two choices then. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Thank you. Since it's the first time that we're seeing anything related to the application beyond what we dealt with previously, this matter's obviously come up a couple of times at committee for different reasons. Mason, I have a couple of questions for Mr. Priamo and maybe the staff if they know the answers. So for this first phase of the development, it looks like there's a lot of repurposing of the surface parking. Is there intention to put underground parking underneath this building, or is it being built with no underground parking? I just want to check that.
Mr. Priamo?
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. The current proposal is to refurbish the existing parking lot, the portion that will not house the new apartment building, and it'll be used as a private parking for that building pending the initiation of Phase 2 and Phase 3. Phase 2 and Phase 3 will involve the construction of a substantial parking structure, 2 levels underground, 3 above, including, as Mr. Fleming indicated earlier, some publicly accessible parking.
Deputy Mayor Helmer?
So in terms of this first one, which is sort of how to describe it, but squaring out the empty space that's there, that's off the street, there's not going to be any underground parking actually under that building.
No, there's no underground parking in this building given its tight confines. We couldn't execute a functional underground parking space because it's too small. But then the balance of the park, almost the entire 100% of the rest of the parking lot will be engaged in the underground parking structure when we proceed with Phase 2 and 3.
So for what it's worth, it seems like a very strange way of phasing the construction. You know, to do the tower that's off the street first, and then to do the underground parking and the other parts of the construction second. I mean, if all those things happen, I could see how this could work. I'm not really a big fan of leaving an empty spot on the street when there's redevelopment happening. It seems like the easiest time to build something that would face out right onto the street would be now when you're building the other building. I don't really understand why you'd leave it empty. If it ends up being this empty space is publicly accessible private space, and then this building, and then a service parking lot for a long period of time before Phase 2 and Phase 3 proceed, I don't think that's such a great outcome, despite the fact that this building looks like a really great building and a good addition to downtown. So despite all those concerns, like I think it's kind of odd, it's going through in a kind of odd order of operations. I think the heritage alteration permit is fine. You know, like, I don't think there's a big problem with the heritage alteration permit, and I support that. So I wouldn't defer it. I don't think that there's a reason to do that. If something permanent was being built in that space that was gonna be contrary to the heritage conservation districts, then I think I could see a problem. But the fact that there's an empty space, you know, I know that it says we wanna build buildings that are 2 to 6 stories, but an empty space, I think for the time being is fine, and it's not taking anything away. And if something gets built there in the future, it would need to conform. So I'm fine with the heritage alteration permit for now.
So would that be a motion, Deputy Mayor Helmer, to approve the heritage alteration permit for 195 Dundas Street?
Sure.
And I have a seconder in Councillor Cassidy. If there are comments from the committee, Councillor Squire.
I'm going to support the heritage alteration permit largely because I heard from both staff and the applicant what I thought were good reasons for the heritage alteration permit and support from it according to our policies. I understand there's concerns from Latch, but they haven't been clearly enunciated, certainly to me, as to what exactly they are and how they can be addressed. And when Mr. Preamble says, well, we don't have anything else, I tend to agree with Councillor, I can't get anything right when I mention your name. The person sitting next to me, you know, I would be really hopeful that the other 2 buildings get built because this would be really incomplete with 1 building with surface parking. So but I don't think that's directly related to this point in time to the heritage alteration permit, so I'm going to support that.
Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is interesting. I can kind of see why the order of operations is such as it is. That parcel is kind of landlocked. If it's not developed first and the other parcel is developed before that, it's going to be really difficult to access it and do the construction of it. It's an incredibly small parcel. I'm impressed that that a building can go there. I understand the concerns from Latch as well, that it's helpful to have a sense of what a street view looks like in that context, even if that it's not being developed out to the front of the street at the sidewalk level itself. However, that said, the treatment of that surface area doesn't change beyond the aesthetic and creating a public-private amenity of sorts. And so nothing's being built to match into the facade of the streetscape on Dundas there. It's tough because I can appreciate why Latch might want more information on this and might wish additional renderings and have a sense of what was said in the heritage impact assessment. I could assume that might be informative to developing a recommendation on a heritage alteration permit here. I might be with my colleagues on this. I'm still kind of on the fence, but see if Councillor Cassidy can sway me.
Thank you for those comments. I don't see any other. There is a motion that is the staff's recommendation to Latch in front of us. I want the committee just to look at that, and I think this is the motion that we will be supporting or not. I do appreciate the comments from the committee. I know this is an unusual situation as well, but I want to go to Councillor Turner.
My apologies. I was just thinking, we had some questions and we're trying to suppose what Latch was thinking. Ms. Welly is still here. And perhaps she might be able to provide some clarification to see if our assessment of Latch's position is appropriate. Is that the concern, is that there's no street level elevation perspective, or is it a little bit further than that? Because the space itself not really undergoing any change at the streetscape level, but more removed and back from that. Proposes no condition change itself, but I can see the perspective. Is that an appropriate? Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And we do have the motion in front of us here. If there's any further conversations on adding or removing the staff recommendation?
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Thank you for that. And now we will go back to the Latch report 2.2. Therefore, if I could have a motion to receive. Councillor Cassidy, you a seconder? This is to receive the Latch's request. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think on item 5.1 with respect to 1588 Clark, there's a couple recommendations in there. So.
I agree. We're just looking at 2.2 right now, which would be just to receive. Oh, we're looking at the, if we are looking at the report, then it should go back to additional business, and then we can deal with items 2.2 and the 5.1. We could do it that way, or we could make a decision on 2.2 and then refer the rest of the report to additional business. There's two ways we can do it. Councillor Turner.
Thank you. I appreciate the clarification. So, seeing as there's some segments in here, it needs to be pulled out. So, can we receive the balance of the report with the exception of because we brought forward the Latch report, unless we hold receipt of that report until later, which might be the better way to do it. So, we've received the delegation. We'll receive the report itself after we hear the public participation meeting. Perfect. Thank you.
I think that's the best way to go. So we will refer the report back to additional business towards the end of the meeting. Thank you. And we will now move on to the public participation meeting. This is 3.1, the application on 555 Wellington Road. I would like a motion to open the public participation meeting. Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Cassidy. I guess we better.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Mr. Falberg, if you could do the presentation, or, sorry, wrong one. You disappeared. Sorry about that.
It's okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. So this application's out at 555 Wellington Road. This site's located approximately 300 meters south of the Wellington Road and Commissioners Road intersection. It's part of a long commercial corridor that extends down the west side of Wellington Road. Here's a better overview of the site and the surrounding context. So to the north is the intersection of Wellington Commissioners. There's the commercial node up there and the hospital on the east side of Wellington Road. Currently, the site's used for a wide variety of commercial uses, and it looks like it's pretty much all used up. So in terms of the application, the requested amendment is to add an associated shopping area with a special provision. This is in addition to the existing ASA 1 zone on the site. This would permit clinics, daycare centers, laboratories, medical, dental offices, professional offices, and service offices as additional uses on the site. These new uses would be restricted to the existing building through that special provision. So in terms of the uses, they are permitted within the existing auto-oriented commercial corridor designation, as well as the future rapid transit corridor place type that would be on the site. The existing site layout currently provides sufficient buffering between the existing built form and abutting residential uses. Also, since the new uses are considered similar or less intense than the existing range of uses, no new impacts are anticipated on this site. As mentioned, the proposed changes will not result in any new development on the site as they're restricted to the existing building. The existing form of development is considered appropriate as it provides limited access along the arterial road and maintains a low single-story form of development, which is in keeping with the intent of the auto-oriented commercial corridor designation. Staff is recommending approval of the requested zoning amendment. It provides additional uses that are appropriate and compatible with the surrounding area, provides an increased opportunity to effectively utilize the existing building, and the existing built form and on-site parking is capable of supporting the requested office-type uses without resulting in any negative impacts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Corby. Any technical questions? I see none. I'd like to go to the applicant. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Harry Frusios. I'm with Salenka Priamo Limited. We're the planning consultants and agents for Werger Realty Limited as it relates to this application at 555 Wellington Road. I just wanted to thank staff for their support and bringing this recommendation report in a timely fashion. I have nothing to add, Madam Chair. We're in support of the staff recommendation. This zoning amendment will allow a more efficient use of the existing building. There is a vacant unit on the site that they would like to put in office use, and this zoning amendment will allow them to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. And any technical questions of the applicant? I see none. I'd like to now go to the public, and starting on my left, if there's anyone here that would like to speak to this application. This is the one on Wellington. And I'd like to ask the question, moving over to the center of the gallery. Any questions, please come forward. And I'd like to move over here. If you'd like to speak to this application, please come forward. And I see none. I'd like to go to the committee to close the public participation meeting. Moved by Councillor Cassidy and seconded by Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
And with that, I'd like to go to the committee. Any comments, questions? Therefore, if I could have a motion to receive the recommendation, Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Squire.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. The next public participation meeting is on a request to repeal the heritage designation at on William Street. So I am looking for a motion to open the public participation meeting. Councillor Cassidy, seconded by Deputy Helmer.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Mr. Fleming.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd just like to start out with a quick introduction of the Heritage Planner that's going to make a presentation to you, because this is her first appearance to the committee. This is Krista Gowan. She graduated with a degree in archaeology from the University of Toronto, which is always near and dear to my heart. She then went on to work in the field of archaeology for a while, and then moved on to obtain a master's degree in heritage conservation from Carleton University. She's had a variety of different experiences in archaeology and heritage planning in her working career, and worked with community organizations. She's actually been involved in some of them herself. And so with that, we're very pleased to have Krista with us. And she's been with us, it's coming up on a year now. So, and she's been tremendous. So over to Krista.
Thank you, Mr. Fleming, for those words, and welcome, Ms. Gowan. If you can do the presentation then.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So a request to repeal the heritage designating bylaw for 429 William Street was received on January 15th, 2019. 429 William Street is located on the west side of William, just north of the intersection of Dundas and William Street. 429 William is not within the West Woodfield Heritage Conservation District. That district is directly north and bounded by Queen. So the property is designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. It was designated in 1993. The property owners who are requesting the repeal of the heritage designating bylaw were the same that requested designation back in 1993. The property owners are having difficulty selling the property, which is the main motivating factor for this request. So the existing bylaw states, in a neighborhood known for its brick architecture, this pre-1877 frame building is noteworthy. This 1.5-story front-end gable frame house has a door and unusual window trim detailing on all elevations, which is seldom seen in London. All the windows and storms are original. There's a remnant finial in the central peak, the bay window on the first facade, the porch is a later addition, and the original roof was probably wood shingles. As the property was designated in 1993, the bylaw is structured differently than those bylaws after 2005. So it means it doesn't have an exact list of heritage attributes. However, this bylaw is still valid, and it is very clear in identifying the heritage attributes. However, I will note that on my site visit back in February and January, that it is believed that the windows were changed, so they're no longer original. The date of when they were changed is unknown, as a heritage alteration permit was not submitted, but this change is in keeping with the same style and proportions as the original windows, so the overall integrity of the property has not been compromised. So I just wanted to give you a close-up of the window trim and window trim around the windows and the doors. It is on all elevations, so that has been retained, and the windows are the only change to be noted. Here are the comparisons in the City of London of pre-1877 1.5-story front gable frame buildings. Some have undergone major alterations, like 134 Mill Street. However, some have not, but you may notice that the trim does not display the same high degree of craftsmanship as 429 William Street. So the building located at 429 William Street was constructed in 1871. In 1870, the property was owned by Robert Kirkpatrick and noted as vacant land. In the 1871 tax assessment rolls, the property was occupied by John Webb, a painter who is noted in the city directory. Since the construction of the building at 429 William Street, the building has been a private residence to laborers, tailors, shoemakers, school teachers, freight agents, name it, list goes on. The property has also been a private school and housed many businesses. Contextually, the property at 429 William was once surrounded by wooden dwellings, which you can see here on the 1881 revised 1888 fire insurance plans. And today you can see the photos on the screen of that it's now surrounded by brick dwellings. So why are we here today? We are here because there's a process to follow under the Ontario Heritage Act. Under Section 32 of the Ontario Heritage Act, an owner of a property designated under Part 4 may apply to Municipal Council to repeal the Heritage Designating Bylaw. Section 32 of the Ontario Heritage Act also directs that after consultation with the Municipal Heritage Committee, so the LATCH, Council shall consider the request within 90 days. Within 90 days, Council can refuse or consent to the request. The 90-day timeline is set to expire on April 15th, 2019. Within 30 days of receiving Municipal Council's decision, anyone may appeal to the Conservation Review Board. The Conservation Review Board makes recommendations regarding appeals, but the final decision rests with Municipal Council. So as you already heard, the LATCH was consulted and made a recommendation. So a request to repeal the Heritage Designating Bylaw is considered through the test to repeal a Heritage Designating Bylaw. So what does that mean? In 2009, the Conservation Review Board hearing 0807 reconciled this process and the evaluation required to justify the repeal of the Heritage Designating Bylaw. It is known as the test to repeal a Heritage Designating Bylaw, and staff in the past have applied this test. The test is essentially using Ontario Regulation 906, the criteria for determining cultural heritage or value. So it's the same as for new designations to determine if the property continues to have cultural heritage value. Ultimately, if the property previously designated is determined to demonstrate one or more of the criteria of Ontario Regulation 906, its heritage designation bylaw should be upheld. So a review of the Heritage Designating Bylaw using the criteria of Ontario Regulation 906 has been completed, and it affirmed that the property at 429 William Street continues to demonstrate significant cultural heritage value and merits protection under the Ontario Heritage Act. On the screen, you'll see a summarized version of the test to repeal the Heritage Designating Bylaw. The first two columns are the criteria under Ontario Regulation 906, and here I provided a summarized version of the Heritage Planner comments. Ultimately, this slide summarizes that the building at 429 William Street has design and physical value because it is a representative example of a 1.5-story front gable frame building, and the trim around all the windows and doors displays a high degree of craftsmanship, which you might remember being noted in the bylaw. The property also has historical value because it supports, because it has the potential to yield the information that contributes to the understanding of the community. And the property also has contextual value because it supports the character of the area by continuing to be a frame building in an area of brick dwellings. Ultimately, the property at 429 William Street is a significant cultural heritage resource, and very little has changed, especially since the time of designation. The property at 429 William Street continues to have a high degree of integrity, as the property has been retained as a 1.5-story front-end gable building, and continues to have cultural heritage value because its many heritage attributes have also been retained. So as the property still merits protection under the Ontario Heritage Act, refusal of the request to repeal the Heritage Designating Bylaw has been recommended.
Thank you, Ms. Gowan. Any technical questions from the committee? I see none. I would like to go to the applicant. If the applicant is here, please come forward. And therefore, I would like to go to the public then to, if there's anyone here that would like to speak to this application, please come forward, stating your name and address, if you so desire.
Janet Hunden, 253 Huron Street. I'm speaking to the letter which you have on page 230 of your added agenda from the president of the local branch of the Architectural Conservancy. She had to leave early, unfortunately, but The Conservancy supports the conclusion of Latch that this is a culturally important building, and that the designation should be maintained. This building was designated on its own, which also suggests its individual importance, and it has been extremely well maintained. We do congratulate the owner on that, but it retains its cultural importance in the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'd like to go across the gallery. If there's anyone else that would like to speak to this application, please come forward to the microphone. I see none, and I'll ask one more time if there's anyone here that would like to speak to this application, please come forward. I see none. I would like to have a mover close the public participation meeting. Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Cassidy.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Thank you, and I'd like to go to the committee. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I can appreciate the challenges that the applicant is bringing forward. I think that there's also a lot of misapprehensions associated with the heritage process and the heritage designations, and what the cans and can'ts do. You can read through the file, and it talks about some misinformation that had been given to a prospective purchaser of the property, which is unfortunate. And I hope that we can take every step to help dispel some of those misconceptions and support the applicant in those ways. Ms. Gowan makes a pretty compelling argument talking about if the conditions that existed to provide the designation in the first place continue to exist, then there's really no rationale in order to repeal it. So I think this is a pretty clean-cut case with respect to that. Certainly the applicant is to be commended for having sought the designation in the first place. I can see the features in this that do make it consistent with the guide and the test that we're given in order to determine whether designation is appropriate or not. So in this case, I'd like to move and put forward the staff recommendation that it be refused.
With that, so there is a motion. I guess I do need a seconder, but I would like to go to Councillor Squire first.
I'm happy to second that. I think Councillor Turner is exactly right. There isn't a legal basis here to change the designation, and all sympathy when you can't sell a property, but there still has to be the basis in law to make the change, and I just don't see that. So I'm happy to second his motion.
See no other comments, so if we could vote on the staff's recommendation, which is to refuse.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
And moving along to our last participation meeting of the evening. It is a participation meeting regarding demolition requests for heritage listed property at 1588 Clark Road. And I would like a motion to open the public participation meeting. Councillor Cassidy, seconded by Councillor Turner.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Welcome, Ms. Dent.
Good evening. This is a request for demolition of heritage-listed property at 1588 Clark Road. The property is located on the east side of Clark Road, just south of Kalali Road. It's at the intersection of Clark and Kalali Roads, near the northeast limits of the City of London, just west of Fanshawe Dam and the conservation area. The property comprises several buildings clustered around a loop drive and includes a house, barn, shed, and a couple ancillary modern metal sheds. The remainder of the property is agricultural fields that are not being actively farmed. The demolition request is specifically for the barn on the property. The property is about 38 acres. It's part of a mid-19th century farm in the former London township. The status of the property is that it's listed on the city's register. Now, properties that are listed on the register are not designated, but are considered to have potential cultural heritage value or interest. There are 3 properties adjacent to this property that are also listed. Additional conditions that you should be aware of, that this area, this property was part of Kalali East Area Plan. Archaeological and built heritage assessment was prepared for this area and included this property in 2001 as well. Presently, it's part of a cultural heritage assessment report for Clark Road improvements as part of an environmental assessment. A little bit about the historical background. Euro-Canadian history of this property begins with land records for Lot 14, Concession 3, which indicate that the whole of 200 acres was granted to the Honorable John Hale in 1817. In 1853, the subject property at the north portion of Lot 4, Concession 3 lists Edward Hale and then John Tackerberry as the owner. The index to the London Township and the map that you see on the right illustrates the division of the property among John Tackerberry's male children after his death in 1877, Jason, Robert, and Samuel, also noting that Nathan also had held previously 50 acres. Samuel Tackerberry is assumed ownership of the farmstead at 1588, and this was based on mapping in 1863. The property is associated clearly with the Tackerberry family. They're early settlers in this area called the Grove. The family originated from Ireland and emigrated to upstate New York. And then to London Township in 1819, and are associated with Methodist Irish pioneer settlement in this area. They were very active members of the growing community in this area. They donated land on their property for the construction of a church and school. And at the Grove Webster Cemetery, located on 1425 Huron Street, there are 17 descendants of the family are currently buried. A little bit about the property, showing you the entrance is off of Clark Road, which you can see on the upper left-hand side. The entrance road is bounded by trees and it crosses a small culvert. The barn, you can see several pictures here. It's a granary barn dating in part from the middle to the late 19th century, and it's the barn that is the subject of the demolition request. The barn is gabled. It has timber frame construction with a rubble stone foundation. It appears to be clad with a metal roof. The typology of the barn is what is called a bank barn, which features a gangway or a barn hill on the north side to access the upper portion of the barn, and there is a stable area below. You can also see small addition was constructed off to the side. There was a silo that was removed, which may account for some of the structural damage and disrepair of the barn that you see here. Here are a few other pictures of the barn and a closer image from the interior showing the structural damage of the east face end of the barn. Now, I wasn't able to actually go into the barn area and look around. The images I took were from the outside looking in due to concerns of structural concerns. Also, if you look at the lower right-hand image, there's a view of the section of the barn stable below. As I mentioned, there are several other buildings on the lot. A view of the drive shed that you can see. There's also a farmhouse, an Ontario farmhouse, 1.5 story, constructed around 1865. There's been several additions to the main primary portion, which obscures its primary form. Also, it has been largely changed on the interior. The windows have been altered. The front gabled window the profile of it's been altered as well. Again, I wasn't able to enter into the house or the drive shed. My assessment of the house was based on a previous assessment that was done in 2001. In 2001. The basement is partially excavated and has a rubble stone foundation. So the request here is for the demolition of a heritage listed property. Here we're specifically talking about the barn. There was consultation with the Latch last week, March 13th. Public participation meeting as well this evening. It was notice was published in the Londoner. I received 2 replies seeking further information about this file. Simply why, what is it about, just general information. Then I should speak to the information that was presented at the Latch meeting last week, and this was information that was presented at the meeting, so I didn't have previous knowledge of it beforehand. And this information was based on word of mouth from the previous owners of the farmstead who were part of the Tackerberry family. There are supposed logs in the drive shed from the original log house on the property, and possible mention of a safe house for the Underground Railroad. Now, again, we don't have any physical documents and the artifacts to back up these family stories, but I guess, based on that information, Latch requested that the recommendation, they supported the recommendation, staff's recommendation to allow the demolition of the barn to move forward. However, to not remove the entire property from the register just yet, to allow further research into these suggested further information about the property. So evaluation criteria, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here. So the staff's evaluation found that the property did not fulfill the requirements for the evaluation criteria under the Ontario Heritage Act, which was in the report, so I'm not going to go through that unless there are specific questions afterwards. Also, I should mention that there was a heritage impact assessment that was done by Sifton Properties, which also found that the property did not meet the Ontario Heritage Act requirements for designation. So the conclusion is that, once again, the property did not meet the designation criteria. Municipal council should consent to the demolition of the property. And as I mentioned before, a little bit of detail about Latch supported staff's recommendation to allow the demolition of the barn to proceed, but wanted the property to remain on the city's register to allow follow-up for research and artifacts on the site. So I should mention as well that this is not unusual. 806 Victoria Street, which was a request from the Roman Catholic Diocese of London in 2017 to demolish a house on their property. That demolition was allowed to go forward. However, the property, which contains a cemetery, was retained on the register. So this is something that is not unusual. So the recommendation here, I'm just showing alteration of the recommendation to reflect Latch's comments to staff at their meeting on March 13th. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Dent. Any technical questions from the committee? Councillor Turner.
Just really quickly, if I might, with respect to designating a property versus the structures on the property, how is that applied to? It seems odd to designate all the structures in one designation.
A designation under the Ontario Heritage Act is the designation of property. So it's not the structures on the property that are designated, but it's the property itself.
I see no other technical questions. Then I would like to go to the applicant, if the applicant is here. I don't see the applicant here, so I would like to therefore go to the public, and I will start here on my left side. If you could come to the microphone, stating your name and address. You do have 5 minutes, and please proceed.
I'm Marlene Tackerberry from 13 Mile Road in Denfield, and I am the holder of the original deeds, the conveyances, a lot of the historical information, and you know, I understand that Mr. John Hale, or actually General John Hale, who died in 1806, was the original owner, and we believe he built that barn and built the house, because I know John Tackerberry did not. And I would like you to reconsider and possibly give me time to work with Latch to convey more of the information with regard to the historical value. Also, that bank barn, in the time that it was built, was an extremely beautiful barn. When my Rasti prince and princess lived in it, it was a beautiful barn, and that was not that long ago. Also, with regard to, there's further history as far as Victor Tackerberry, who was the Grand Master of the Masons. There was Samuel Tackerberry, who we believe was part of the traveling of the Black people, the Underground Railway. He was a noted musician, and he and his daughters traveled all around. You have to remember, this was built when it was called the Old Post Road, and there was nothing there. I believe I have the deed, which John Tackerberry had to go down to Boston to pay $300 to the son of the deceased gentleman who owned it. He was a good friend of James Wolfe, the Major General, who I think we all know who Wolfe is. As far as saving Nathaniel's house, I have a letter, like, just saying he didn't live there long and he moved on to Oxford Street. I have the conveyance for the cemeteries, I have the conveyance for the schools, and that was one of the things that Mr. Hale, he was in charge of setting up the education. So when they went down to Boston to get the deed on the property, they also set up the conveyances for the school and for the church. There was a whole group of them that came up here. We're talking the Kernahans, the Beltons, the Needhams. They're all Tackaberries. They were prolific. They had a lot of children. I think there is value in saving the house, definite value in saving the barn because it's all part of the picture. The original, there was a log house there that was behind the drive shed, and the drive shed, no, the drive shed was the drive shed. The, Samuel's daughters played in it, and that would be the second generation. There are a few Nathaniels. The Nathaniel was the second son. He was, someone would probably call him a ne'er-do-well, and he did not stay in that property. I don't know what else to say. I'm just stunned at the condition of it. As far as the interior, when it was left, there was the same woodwork that was when it was in the beginning. As far as the windows, they were put in by foreigners back in about 1975, and there was not the technology there is today to restore them to what they could be. The interior of the house was pretty much the same. It is a triple brick, true triple brick house, and it's got the quick lime mortar. It's not even mortar. It's a unique type of construction. Talking a crumble stone walls or whatever it's referred to, it's methodically well-built stone that has the stone basement, and the barn is built the same. And again, John Tackaberry, they were weavers. They weren't bricklayers when they bought the property and moved up. They came up, our records say 1829, because there was a child who was born down in Pratt's Hollow, and there's monuments down there to the Tackaberrys, and it's very well established about what they were there and what there was here. We still have the grove.
Sorry to interrupt. I just want to let you know you've got probably about 20 seconds
Okay,
left.
the Grove Cemetery still exists, and Anniversary Sunday, we still get 80 people out. That's all I can say. There's lots of information. This house predates Eldon House.
Thank you. I'd like to just move along. If there's anyone else here that would like to speak to this application. I see none, and I'd like to ask for the third time. Just one moment. I'm just going to go over to this side. There's no one here, and I'll go back. Yes, please state your name and address for the record.
Angela Tackaberry. I live at 575 Wilkins. I resided at this property for most of my life. There's lots of history, and I just think it fits into that area. There's farms on the other side. There's a conservation area. Like, I don't see what else you would put there. And like, we have stuff dating back. Like, this is a wooden cannonball, like metal. I don't even know what it is, but I just don't see how putting anything else there would fit. There's nothing else around there. Like, why would you put a business in front of the conservation area, in front of the lakes? When you go to any other side of the city, look at all the old farms. They've all been destroyed. I think this is something we need to hold on to, because I do care about the heritage. I do care about the agriculture, and I don't see how building or selling it to Sifton is going to make London better.
Thank you. And I see no one else from the public wanting to speak to this application, so I'll look for a motion to end the public participation meeting. Councillor Turner, seconded by Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. I'd like to go to the committee for any questions. or comments? Councillor Turner.
Madam Chair, just a clarification if I could. Ms. Wally, as she finished her presentation, it said that they wanted some more information with respect to its connection potentially to the underground railroad, etc. But did the recommendation from their report, is she recommending a change to the recommendation that they brought forward from the report, or just the recommendation that they had in their report?
Is Ms. Wally here? I can't see. I wonder if you could speak to that.
Yeah, I think Latch agreed to the possible demolition of the barn, but not the property, not the house, because they felt that there was room for a lot more research to be done on the house itself.
Thank you for the clarification. I was so no change to the building officer be advised that council consents to the demolition of the barn, that the house located on the property be referred to the stewardship subcommittee to conduct more research, and it being noted that a presentation from Dr. Dent was received as well. So that's the recommendation that's there. That stands. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that clarification. Any other questions? If the committee will allow me, just do have a quick question from here. I was hoping that the applicant would be here, but I know part of the recommendation is that something commemorative or historic would be, I guess, displayed on the property, but I'm not sure how that will look like. And is that for not just the barn? Is that for the property?
Yes, thank you, Madam, through the chair. That was left kind of open. Some form of commemoration. There's different ways that can happen. It could be a plaque. It could be naming of streets in the area, because the area is has been proposed for a subdivision. So that how the commemoration actually happens is something that is left open.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Turner.
Just more comments than anything, if I might. This is a bit rare for us, actually, to have fairly lengthy generational ties to a building, and I was a little surprised when you stated your name was Tackaberry. I was like, oh, this is going to be interesting and fascinating. Thank you very much for the history through that, and it's helpful. I think the recommendation balances a bit of that, and I think as it shows up here, it has a clause B in there that 1588 Clark Road be removed from the register. Dr. Dent's presentation recommended striking that clause. I think on the last slide you had the strike through clause B, so whatever would be brought forward would be A and C, possibly. So those A and C, sorry, is that the chief building official be advised that council consents to the demolition of the barn, and that the property owner be requested to commemorate the historic contributions of the Tackaberry family in the future development of the property. So it sounds like there's still opportunity and discussion that's left for the London Advisory Committee on Heritage to do some further research, and quite probably with the submissions from the Tackaberrys into that process as well, which sounds like it would be quite helpful for context and history. The recommendations from Latch and from Dr. Dent seem sound. I can appreciate the apprehensions for the loss of the barn in that circumstance, but I think in this circumstance it's probably appropriate, and I'd be willing to move A and C of that recommendation.
Thank you for those comments, Councillor Turner. I would like to go to staff just to get clarification that indeed B is to be taken off this recommendation, and if you just could give a little bit more clarification.
Certainly. Essentially, the property will remain on the register. However, the barn the request for the demolition of the barn will be approved.
Thank you. So you do want be off, and so this is just for the barn then?
Yes, and that's to reflect the Latch's comments and also the late comments that we received about some of the possible historical significance of the property.
Thank you for that clarification. Mr. Tomasinik.
Just to build upon that last answer, I hope I'm not stating the obvious, but because it'll remain on the register, if there's a future demolition request, it'll go through the same public process as this process right now.
And I'd like to go to Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Never a dull moment at the Planning Committee. Through you, I also want to thank the Tackaberries for coming here. I think it's probably a first, something like this many generations with, I imagine, continuous occupation of the site is really fascinating. So through you to staff, I wonder what's the condition of the house right now? Is it vacant?
The house is not vacant. It is currently being rented.
And I know that this doesn't have any bearing on whether or not we go, follow the staff recommendation and allow demolition of the barn, but I wonder if we have any indication of what the future plans are for the entire site.
I can't really speak to that specifically.
Mr. Yeoman?
Through the chair, so there is no application on these lands, however, they are designated for urban uses that would be coming before you through a planning process of subdivision.
Deputy Mayor Helmer? Not done. Or, sorry, before I go to you, sorry about that, Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I agree with Councillor Turner. I think it's probably appropriate to allow the staff recommendation to go through. I'll have probably a different opinion if we see a similar application for the house itself. And it's too bad that, listening to the former owners of the property in their time that the barn was a viable structure and now it no longer seems to be. So that's a shame, and that tends to happen in London, and I hope the same thing doesn't happen with the house.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Thank you, and through the chair to our staff, I think, unfortunately, when we're going through the presentation, we went through a lot of the initial presentation, and then we skipped over the evaluation, which I'm not sure in retrospect if that was the part to shorten up in the presentation, but I want to ask a couple questions about that because I think it's important that we're looking at the specifics of the criteria and how we're evaluating these properties. So there is some reference to the contextual value, and there's some references in the evaluation to things in the future that may or may not happen. So for example, the extension of the Veterans Memorial Parkway, the widening of Clark Road, like there's some references to that stuff that say this is sort of on the horizon, and it's unlikely that this lot pattern, for example, will be maintained. So I wonder if you could just speak to that, how you fit those kind of things that could be happening in the future or are likely to happen in the future into an evaluation in terms of the Heritage Act.
Thank you. Through the chair, a couple things. The proposed widening of Clark Road and the extension is something that is happening now. There's an environmental assessment that is underway. So that proposed widening and also the extension will irrevocably change the context in and around this farmstead. The road will be widened. Also, the profile of the highway now will be curvilinear, which will no longer match the very rectangular grid and of the concession and lot pattern. So part of that context, unfortunately, because of that, that construction will change the surrounding area. It's already transitioning into residential context in and around the area. And mainly, there's a concern that the farmstead would become isolated, and it would lose that context of the rural agricultural setting that it was once embedded in. So that speaks to the context, and I think that was, in terms of the criteria for the evaluation, that was probably the area that was the strongest. However, my evaluation inevitably found that was going to be lost because of the road widening and the change of the profile of the road. It was going to impinge on that area.
Thank you. And so I wanted to ask that question first because I think it impacts on some of the other pieces of the evaluation where, say, there's some other examples of, for example, this kind of barn, and frankly, there's some ones that are better examples. And you cite an example, which is immediately across the street, right? So it's at 511 Clark Road. These contextual changes apply to that property as well. And the reason I'm asking the question is that I would agree that the area is in transition, it's changing from what has been a long-standing agricultural use to something else. The question is, how do we retain the heritage that's in the area through a transition like that? And certainly some of it can't be retained, but some of it probably can. And the question is whether it's worthy of designation or not. That's what we're always dealing with here at Planning Committee. So in terms of the other examples, they're very close by in the sort of immediate neighborhood, 424 Clark Road, 511 Clark Road. Do you think those same contextual changes are going to impact the heritage value of those properties? And I'm trying to think out to the future if we're dealing with other applications where the same kind of arguments will be made to say, well, 511 should go because the context is different.
I hesitate to answer. Likely yes. I think one of the reasons why I identified 1424 Clark Road as something that should be considered for further evaluation for designation is simply because it is not vulnerable to these changes that are occurring around Clark Road, because it's closer to the dam. It's also a Tackleberry house. It is far superior. The stewardship subcommittee of the Latch has already done a bit of research on it in terms of its architectural merits. It's a rare example of an Ontario farmhouse in London. So there's a sense that perhaps that could be a commemorative property to commemorate this area and this family, whereas the farmstead at 1588, the setting is going to be severely compromised and won't have the significance that it once had because of the context.
Thank you for that. If the committee will allow me, I do have a quick question just following up on Deputy Mayor Helmer's questions around the context of, we know the whole area is going to be eventually changing. How important is this barn to the homestead when it comes to determining the homestead's heritage value? Is there any significance? Will that play a role in determining the heritage value of the homestead? By removing the barn, will it change?
Well, in order to evaluate the request for demolition of the barn, the the entire property was evaluated. So through that evaluation, the entire property did not meet the criteria for designation as a whole. So it was evaluated as a whole. And I think that that's where the components of the context come into play. And evaluating that as a whole, because of it being compromised, it didn't meet the criteria for designation as an entire property. So leaving the property on the register simply allows some follow-up to research that might uncover significance of the house and the property. And so that's the reasoning behind that.
And with the follow-up of the research, would that be done with the family as well, or would it be, just because I know it was asked by the public to have further conversations with Latch?
Yes, through the chair, of course. And it's something that the Latch has already identified as a task that the subcommittee of Latch, the stewardship committee, would be tasked with.
Thank you. Any further comments from the committee? I do need a seconder for the motion moved by Councillor Turner. We do need a seconder with the motion that's in front of you as well. Councillor Squire. I see no further comments. If we can vote, or Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Can you just call A separately?
Just need a seconder.
She just needs a second.
So that was Deputy. Oh. If you could just give the clerk a moment. Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you. I just want to comment on the idea of agricultural properties like this and losing their contextual value because basically our urban settlement continues to spread. You know, we've designated barns. This committee has designated barns in Ward 5. We have 2 designated barns, and a subdivision is about to be built all around it. And you know, there is the how do we save or maintain some of the ties to the areas of London and the past agricultural significance and the what took place on those lands being agricultural activity when we are an urban center and a big and growing urban center. You know, we can't save every single farm in the city that's no longer a farm. It's surrounded by an urban setting, but you know, we do have to be rather a little bit picky in what we do choose to save. I do recognize that as well, but I don't agree that we tear down every historically significant property in the city just because it's no longer agricultural land around it. We have to save some of our history and our cultural buildings in some way, or we'll lose it all. And we saw fit to save the barns on Sunningdale Road.
So we have a motion in front of us. I think B is going first, with the property owner being requested to commemorate the historic contributions of the Tackerberry family in the future development of this property.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
And A. Councillor Turner?
Just a point of clarification. Refusing the demolition permit in this circumstance would then trigger us to have to designate the property, would it not?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I think that's an important piece to keep in mind. We have probably at this point, we've had information that's showing that both the London Advisory Committee on Heritage and the Heritage Planner have not found enough criteria to meet under the Heritage Act to designate the property. As such, if we were to refuse it, our next action would then have to be to provide designation contrary to the assessment that's been given to us. And so I do recognize Councillor Cassidy's remarks. In those circumstances, we had pretty strong recommendations from both those, the Heritage Planner and Latch, to make designations for those barns. And certainly because of their uniqueness, this barn certainly is historic, but one of the aspects that made the other barns worthy of heritage preservation was their uniqueness, and this one is a pretty consistent design pattern with most barns that exist and are built of that era. So I would really encourage you to support the proposal put forward here.
Thank you for that clarification. I think it's important to note that. Councillor Squire.
I think it's really important that a couple of things. First of all, when we're applying heritage criteria, we're really applying very specific and set out criteria, and staff has gone away and looked at those specific criteria, and it's, in my submission, it's appropriate to support those kind of findings. But if we don't do that and we say, you know, we're not going to support it for another reason, we run the risk of losing our consistency in terms of what are we going to do with heritage properties when they come before us. And, you know, it's not easy. We would like to keep all buildings that people have an attachment to. I understand that, but they still have to have those heritage criteria. And in this case, that's what is being presented to us. And I think we have to be consistent and follow that.
Thank you. And the motion is up A, consenting to the demolition of the barn.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-1.
Thank you. Moving on then to the items for direction. Councillor Turner.
Sorry, Madam Chair. I did, for the Tackaberry's benefit, if I might, through you, Madam Chair, what the process is right now. I know this, I like to explain these just because they're confusing. The permission has been given to do a demolition of the barn. The property itself and the buildings thereof are still on the heritage inventory. So the recommendation to remove them from the heritage inventory was stricken from the recommendation. It is not going forward. The property still remains on the inventory. Any further applications for demolitions of any of the buildings on the property would have to come through the same process and have to be evaluated on their merits in order to do so. So it was specifically what we were dealing with in this circumstance was the barn. So I hope that helps. Thank you, Madam Chair, for that opportunity.
Thank you for the clarification as well. So moving on to items for direction, we have 4.1, the second report of the Environmental and Ecological Planning Advisory Committee. Moved by Councillor Cassidy, and I would like a seconder. Councillor Turner.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. Next up is the Lambeth Community Improvement Plan, and I know staff have a brief presentation. Before we receive it, I wonder if I could ask the Vice Chair to take over the chair since this Community Improvement Plan is in my ward.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm happy to take over for a little while, and I welcome Ms. Snyder, and we have a staff presentation.
Madam Chair, I'm just going to make a quick introduction again, if I could.
Go ahead, Mr. Fleming.
Thank you. And as you pointed out, this is Laurel Snyder. This also is her first presentation to the committee. Laurel's been with us 1 year and 11 days. Just asked her that, and she's confirmed. She did go to Laurier University, where she received her undergrad, and then went on to do a master's degree at Waterloo in planning. She's worked at the City of Waterloo, Cambridge, Woolwich. She's done a variety of different types of planning work, including policy work, planning and development application work, worked with BIAs, downtown revitalization. Really pleased to have Laurel here with us, and as I said, she's been with us a while and doing a great job, so over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fleming, and I won't repeat anything that us Western students used to say about Laurier way back in the day. Go ahead, Ms. Snyder.
Wow, that's quite a comment. So Chair Cassidy, members of the committee, my colleagues and members of the audience, my name is Laurel Davies Snyder. I'm extremely pleased to be here to present the draft Lambeth Community Improvement Plan. I have a brief presentation to outline the key points of the project. So background, what is a CIP? Essentially, it's a planning tool. It's some legislation that allows municipalities to take specific action to support improvements in a community, in a defined area or for specific topics. So affordable housing and brownfields CIPs are examples of specific topics that can benefit from a CIP. CIPs can help to address reuse and restoration of lands. It can address growth management challenges and help plan for rehabilitation and land use changes. In terms of the Lambeth CIP, I'd like to outline a bit of the community engagement we went through. I wasn't here when it started, but I've read all the files and seen the number of comments and the amount of community consultation that was completed. So there was a city project webpage, a number of project updates sent out, 3 community meetings and workshops, 2 Pulse team meetings. The Pulse team was the coordinating committee that worked with staff to help communicate with the community. There was 1 Lambeth Community Association meeting, a B2B, business-to-business group meeting, presence at the Harvest Festival, and a number of other discussions and meetings with stakeholders and organizations. So what did we hear from all this consultation? We heard a number of key principles, things that before we distilled down into our goals and actions, specific actions, just the general sense of what people valued and prioritized. Lambeth is a destination, it's authentic, people like the quiet and small town feel, a lot of community pride, unique businesses, it's a welcoming community, etc. So these were basically the cornerstones. These are the things that helped us set the goals and the actions and the objectives, the building blocks that inform the CIP. So one of the steps, an important step in establishing the community improvement plan is to define actually where the CIP should apply. So this is known as the project area. So seen on the screen through consultation, this is what is recommended as the CIP project area in Lambeth. So where the actual CIP would apply. So the boundaries are roughly Dingman Creek to the west and the east, Green Hills Golf Club to the south, and Kilbourne Road and the future extension of Kilbourne Road and the Clayton Walk Malpass Road subdivision to the north. We've broken up the proposed project area into 3 distinct subsections, sub-areas, based on their characteristics. So there's the Lambeth Village Core, which is number 1. You can see across Main Street from Campbell to Colonel Talbot and down Colonel Talbot. Warncliffe Road Corridor, which runs from Campbell out to just past Savoy Street, and then the remainder, which is the Lambeth residential neighborhood. So again, these sub-areas are based on the characteristics of those areas. Things just naturally fell into those 3 sub-areas. The next step was to set the vision and goals for the Lambeth CIP. So the vision sets the tone for how people see Lambeth, how it's becoming, how it's changing, and what the priorities are. So in terms of the vision, it's up there on the screen. Our Lambeth will be a place for others to visit, well known for its history. It comes alive through the charming historic main streets, unique shops and services, the Dingman Creek, parkland, and community events. So from that, you can see that the vision clearly emphasizes cultural heritage, main streets, local businesses, natural environment, and above all, the sense of community. From the vision and from all the community feedback, there were goals, 6 goals that were identified. And what these goals do is they highlight the key areas that people prioritize. They also help us organize the action items. So the 6 goals are supporting businesses in the local community, the local economy, strengthening community and connections, improved mobility and safety, developing high-quality public realm and recreation opportunities, strengthening and conserving cultural heritage, and enhancing and conserving natural heritage. So from these key goals, and from all the input we received, we distilled the action items. So these are the things that people want to happen in Lambeth. So there are 85 actions, and we split them out into municipal action items, community opportunities, and things that were identified during the process that actually have already been completed. They were already underway, part of a project, or part of an existing program. So out of those 85 municipal action items are the ones that the municipality would be responsible for. Community opportunities are things that the community could really grab onto and shape in a way that best suits their community and suits their vision for Lambeth. And again, the priorities that we already identified, that people identified, we chose to include these in the CIP because what it illustrates is that what people wanted to see in Lambeth is very consistent with existing plans, for example, the cycling master plan, the ongoing Parks and Rec master plan, things that are already underway. So we wanted to make sure we included these, even though they're already completed, just for consistency and so people could have a complete picture of Lambeth moving forward. I'd also like to mention that we consulted with various department representatives. Some of them were here tonight. So we made sure that we consulted with Parks and Recreation, with NCFS, with engineering to ensure that the action items are consistent with their visions and that the Lambeth CIP does not undermine or override things in any way, that things are working together. In terms of next steps, the reason we're here tonight is to ask for direction or approval for the direction to circulate the CIP for feedback. Also mention we're having a community meeting and showcase on this Thursday from 6:30 to 8 at the Lambeth Arena. And that's an opportunity for us, Councillor Hopkins actually requested this meeting, for us to talk with the community and stakeholders about these draft action items, proposed action items, and the goals, make sure we're not missing anything, make sure that things are on track, make sure people clearly understand where the opportunities are. And I've also invited community groups and organizations to set up a table so that they can explain what they do, perhaps recruit some new members for their activities as well. Basically bring people together, build that community capacity, and communicate. And that's something that I heard very clearly during the consultation, is that people in Lambeth want to have that connection with one another. We will then incorporate the feedback and bring the final Lambeth area CIP back to you. So, that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Ms. Snyder. And I look to committee, and I think the ward councillor would probably like to say a few things.
Thank you very much. I definitely do, and I wanted to remove myself, so I've got my ward councillor hat on here. And I think it's, first of all, really important that the committee realizes this is a draft community improvement plan coming to us, so it is going to be going out for circulation. And there will be an opportunity, like Ms. Snyder did say, the community meeting that's going to be happening this Thursday, in fact, at the Community Lambeth Arena, to have further input and dialogue with the community. When we started this community improvement plan, we went back to, I think it was 2015. And at that time, I was new to council and realized the importance of the Lambeth Village and the community, and how it is important it is to London. And with all the development that has been going on in this area, it basically became a challenge for Lambeth to understand what is important to Lambeth, and how does Lambeth keep the Lambeth Village, that small feeling, as the whole area is being engulfed with development. I thought that was very, very important to have that conversation in the community and to understand what is important to Lambeth and to maintain that village. It's been a long time coming. You can see it didn't go as fast as, say, the Hamilton Road Community Improvement Plan. And that's another thing I've learned with community improvement plans. They're not exactly all the same. And it does take time, and I'm glad we spent the time to figure out what is important, because I think it is important to get it right. And I really want to thank staff and the community to be being patient and understanding what exactly is important to Lambeth. And I think we're almost there. There's been a number of challenges along the way, because we've had a major infrastructure project on Main Street, which has been a very important conversation in the community and concern. And that needed to happen as well. That project is almost 90%. So I think the time is right now as we can move forward with the community improvement plan. You could see with the information the things that are important to Lambeth. And there are, it's a large area, and I think staff did a great observation in dividing it into three parts, into three sub areas. I think because of the large area, it's very, it can be very confusing, because what is important in one side of Lambeth may not be the same. So sort of setting those sub areas, it was, I think it's going to be quite helpful for the community to come together and understand moving forward. Obviously, cultural heritage is huge, important to the Lambeth community. Cultural heritage is a little bit difficult sometimes to grasp. It's not like a heritage building that you can see that is old and needs to be fixed. Cultural heritage is a larger, broader conversation, and what that means to the community. The importance of supporting businesses, how we move forward with that. Also protecting the natural heritage. You've got that Dingman Creek sort of coming to the west side, coming down Ward 9 and Lambeth, sort of abutting to that. Again, how we develop, how we change this area and maintain the importance and the integrity of this area is so important. I just, I'm so looking forward to continuing the conversation with Lambeth as we move forward. To me, it's such an exciting place. Lambeth, it's where urban and agriculture, the agriculture community, that's where everything comes together and clashes. And again, getting back to the culture of this area, is very much agricultural, but we are changing. And this community improvement plan, this draft that we have before us, is very, very important to Lambeth keeping its uniqueness and identifying itself as we move as a city and change. So I'm hoping the committee will accept the draft coming to us here this evening, and as we continue the conversation with the community.
Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. Anybody else? Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Just, I know I recognize it's a draft, so we'll be dealing with it again, but I did think that the inclusion of the sign loan program, I think that is a good example of coming up with something that's very specific to a particular area. You know, not every community improvement plan area requires something like that. It seems like it's identifying something that is a need in this particular area. So I'm interested to see that. I think one of the advantages of the different CIPs is that different things can happen in different parts of the city. With even the same kind of funding envelope, but they're focusing on different priorities. So I'm interested to see how it comes back in the final version.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Anybody else? No takers? Okay, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for your presentation. I think it was a great report as well. And, you know, when I go in and out and around Lambeth, I see the sign, lovely Lambeth, and I think the CIP will be a really good tool to maintain the loveliness of Lambeth. And I do agree that it is a unique village setting, and looking forward to see the plan come to fruition. And with that, I will return the chair to the chair, and we can vote on that. Oh, do we have a mover? I believe it's moved by Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Deputy Mayor Helmer, and we can vote on that.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. Moving along, we have the deferred matters list in front of us. If I can, a motion moved by Councillor Cassidy. And if I can have a seconder, Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
No, we do have another additional item here, which is the latch report that we are bringing forward in its entirety. I know 2.2, if we can change that to receiving the information from Latch, and if there are any other comments or concerns from the committee, be happy to hear it. I see none, so I do need a motion. Councillor Cassidy. And if I could get a seconder here. I know we're almost there. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. Councillor Turner.
Yes, Madam Chair. Under additional business, we received an email from Councillor Van Holst with respect to official plan amendment and zoning amendment potential for the Glencairn Community Resource Centre. I was wondering if we might just give him a quick opportunity to address that request. My thinking on this is that the email was received during the course of the meeting, so Allow me to continue. My thinking is that since this has not been posted on the agenda, then it's not valid for discussion or movement at this point. But Councillor Van Holst would like to make that inquiry, so I'd like to extend that opportunity to him to do so if that's acceptable.
And that's an inquiry. I'm sorry, I haven't seen this email, so I need a little bit more information. I wonder if Councillor Van Holst, if you could just speak to it for a moment.
Happy to, Madam Chair. The Glencairn Neighborhood Resource Center is working with a group that wants to put in a low-income dental clinic. And that was in the news months ago. And they're proceeding with that, but I understand, and they're asking for a zoning change to allow that to happen. However, the group is unable to pay for the zoning, the fees for the zoning change, and have asked if the city might attempt a city-initiated zoning change, which is something that can be done. And so I'd ask staff to help with a motion that basically asks staff to not to do the zoning change, but simply, I believe, prepare something so that council could consider that. And that's what the motion was about. But and I don't know if there's someone here, someone left that can speak to that.
If you could go through
item.
the chair here.
Okay, yes, sure. So I don't know if there's somebody there who can speak through that, Madam Chair, but maybe you could inquire.
If I may, I'm not familiar with the request. I've just picked it up on the email. I wonder if the councillor would be okay with bringing forward a communication to the next planning meeting on this request. I think it's important that it would be open and transparent, but I'm up to the committee with comments. Councillor Turner.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. I think that would be most appropriate. I think it's anything that is directing staff requires some public notice beforehand doing so, and have the context with it. I recognize that our next meeting is not for another month. It's 2 cycles as we've canceled the next meeting on the April 1st. However, reading through the email chain, this looks like it really just started about 3 or 4 days ago in terms of seeking the request in this regard, and they still have some fundraising left to do, so there's still miles to go before they sleep, as one might say. So I think there's still ample opportunity to be able to bring this forward, to have it considered and discussed at that time.
Thank you. So if the councillor can bring forward a communication to the next planning committee meeting, Deputy Mayor Helmer.
I'm okay with talking about it, I suppose, at a future meeting. I do have to say, just in general, that I have some pretty significant concerns with the idea that because somebody has difficulty in paying for a zoning application fee, that we would then waive it by essentially initiating the amendment ourselves. I think that would be opening up a very difficult can of worms. I think that the idea of having the low-income dental clinic is a good idea. But I don't want to get lost that what we're talking about here is the city initiating a zoning amendment so that the applicant doesn't have to pay the fee. The fee is quite substantial. It's $11,000. We just increased it to be even higher than it was. And in the discussions about the fees, we had some discussions about, are they all really this much work, and should they be at different levels for a sort of minor one versus a major one? And we decided to keep it at the average. And I think this is where we run into these issues where people have difficulty paying. But there are a lot of people who have difficulty paying the zoning application fees for a variety of different reasons. And I think in this particular circumstance, we've got a city-funded organization that's trying to provide a public service, essentially. I can see why there's a rationale but we really have no framework for managing those things. And I can see a city-initiated amendment that's more broad than one site but a city-initiated amendment for a specific site, that's what I'm having trouble with. So I just want to say that now so that Councillor Van Holst is aware of at least those concerns on my part while we're talking about it today.
Thank you for those comments. And with that, are there any further comments? So if the councillor could come forward at the next Planning and Environmental Committee with a communication, we can, that is my suggestion. I feel very uncomfortable. I agree with what Deputy Mayor Helmer has just said. If we start having that conversation right now and really not understanding what's going on in terms of what the request is, I think it's important that you do the homework with that communication. And with that, I see no other requests, and I will move adjournment. Councillor Cassidy and Councillor Turner. Good night. All in favor? Thank you.